Who here is a fan of superhero movies? I'd imagine pretty much everyone, by the looks of it. They're pretty ubiquitous nowadays. I'm pretty sure I saw the new Black Widow movie by accident. Personally, one of my favourite heroes is Superman. He's faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. He can jump tall buildings in a single bound. But if you expose him to a green rock, he crumbles. Anyone can defeat Superman if you just have a piece of kryptonite. And this is what I love about him. He has these extreme strengths, seemingly a god with limitless powers, but he has this extreme weakness that reduces him to nothing. And it's these extremes which is such a great analogy for neurodiversity. Because neurodiversity is about extremes. As you can see on the screen, the rainbow line represents neurodiverse people, and it bounces between very high and very low for various cognitive skills. A cognitive skill is a little bit different to a regular skill. A regular skill is stuff like how good you are at Java, or JavaScript, or how well you can design a database, or how good you are at web design, or how about designing a decision tree. Where a cognitive skill is the skills that underline and empower those. Stuff like your organizational ability, how well you can organize your day and your calendar, your innovation skills, how well you can come up with new and creative ideas, your executive functioning skills, which is taking a big idea and breaking it up into lots of little ideas, your design skills, your time management skills, your empathy, your focus, and your socializing skills. People with neurodiversity have extreme strengths and extreme weaknesses in these areas, and it differs by different neurodiverse individuals. For me, I'm very good at organizing, innovation, executive functioning skills, but I can struggle with time management sometimes, where I get a bit too focused into what I'm doing and miss a meeting. Someone who's neurotypical still has these strengths and weaknesses, but they're less extreme. So you can often think about neurodiverse people as people who are specialized in cognitive skills. And these cognitive skills empower their regular skills. And teams already have specialists. You have the customer whisperer, who's capable of, after you spend 2 hours explaining to the customer why what they want is a bad idea, he comes in, spends 5 minutes with the customer, and the customer tells him it's a bad idea. You have the SQL ninja, who can write a query that runs 10 times faster than the one you wrote, because she deeply understands the underlying database. You have the Linux legend, who can similarly make Linux do literally anything. I'm pretty sure he made him a cup of coffee the other day. You have the Jira expert, who does the laborious work of setting up Jira so we can all enjoy it. And then you have perhaps the most important skill, willing to write COBOL. You have the guy who understands regex, the cloud guru, or the genius debugger. Someone who's neurodiverse just fits in as a cognitive specialist in addition to being a regular specialist. And that's how teams work. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and it makes us fit better together. But let's take a step back and talk about what is neurodiversity. Well, what does the dictionary say? The range of differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits regarded as a part of normal variation in the human population. Well, that's quite obtuse, as you'd expect from Oxford Dictionary. But let's break it down a little bit. It's basically saying that people who are neurodiverse have brains that function differently. And because of that, this can impact their behavior in various ways. Basically, people who are neurodiverse have minds of different kinds, and that these differences are regarded as normal, seen often in the human population. And whenever something has a normal variation, scientists, being scientists, like to put names on it. So let's talk about some of these normal variations. These are 6 of the common neurodiverse conditions. You have dyspraxia, which are people strong in verbal skills, empathy, and intuition. And when I talk about these conditions, typically when we talk about neurodiverse conditions, we talk about what they struggle with and what their weaknesses are. And that's important things to be aware of. But today, we're going to talk about the strengths. You have dyscalculia, which are people with strong verbal skills and innovative thinking. You have Tourette syndrome, people with strong observational skills, cognitive control, and creativity. You have autism spectrum condition, which are people with strong concentration, fine detail processing, and memory. You have dyslexia, people with strong visual thinking, creative skills, and 3D mechanical skills. And despite what you may think, 3D mechanical skills do come up in software development. ADHD, which is people with creativity, hyperfocus, energy, and passion. I actually was fortunate to work with a great colleague who had ADHD. And she said to me, Ryan, my superpower is no matter what time of day it is, I can go full speed. Like, my energy and passion, no matter what time it is, motivates the rest of the team, even if it's 4 p.m. on a Friday night, or if it's like 2 a.m. because something went wrong. And that really shows the strengths of neurodiverse people. Let's talk about prevalence. Around 17-ish% of people have neurodiversity. 4% with ADHD, 1% with autism, 10% dyslexia, 1% dyspraxia, and 1% Tourette's. Now, there are two problems with these statistics. The first of all is it varies by population. So our industry, the software industry, tends to have a higher rate of neurodiversity, especially autism. And the second problem is, the neurodiverse is what's known as a tip of the iceberg problem. There is the visible portion, and that's the portion of people who are diagnosed and disclose that they're diagnosed. A lot of people choose not to. The other problem being is, to get diagnosed, you have to appear in front of a psychologist at some point in your life. And if things go well, if your neurodiversity maps onto society well, that may never happen. So you could go your whole life not knowing about it. And that's perfectly fine if you're a happy person. There's one more thing to think about when it comes to talking about what neurodiversity is. And that's what neurodiversity is to people who are neurodiverse. The most important idea to understand here is different does not equal disabled. So neurodiverse people think, as I said, themselves as people with minds of different kinds. Minds that have different strengths and weaknesses and different quirks than the neurotypical person. Often we see just the struggles, but that's because they do come with struggles. But the relationship between neurodiversity and disability is complex. Some people who are neurodiverse are disabled, some are not. And the relationship is far out of scope for this talk. But that's something to keep in mind. And there's a really good analogy to explain this. Let's say you've had an amazing day at work. You somehow nailed 4 features and deployed them in a single day. You showed the client your website design and he loved it. You made a model and it has 99.99% accuracy, and you're just feeling amazing at the day. That's new levels of productivity. You don't even know how you did it. Then at the end of the day, you go home and do whatever you enjoy. For many people here, that'd be video games. For others, you might watch TV, read a book, go to the gym, walk the dog, whatever it is for you. And you go to bed at the end of the day and you're like, I wish every day could be like this. Then you wake up the next morning, a bit groggy, have your cup of coffee, and you read the news. And to your absolute shock, everybody but you spawned beautiful angel wings overnight. And you're like, oh gosh, I feel so unlucky. And you see them, flying about. Flying stock was invented overnight. And you're like, oh, well, this sucks. Why did I have to be the one who runs out, or who missed out? But you carry on with your life. You have work to do, deadlines to meet. And over time, you start to wonder yourself, am I disabled? Because everyone else can do this thing I can't do. The neurodiverse community and the disability community would argue no, because you can still do everything you need to have a fulfilling life. You can still work, you can still make your own meals, you can still go to social events. When you go to work, you catch the bus. They have to rename TransPerth to TransU because you're the only person who needs it now. And more or less your life goes on. But then one day, some newfangled advocate comes along and says, well, everybody can fly now, so I'm going to build a building for flying people. And he puts a big, long cylinder at the middle, so you can fly to the level you live on or want to visit. And he puts a big helipad on the top so everyone can land on nice, solid ground. And it's at this point that you've become a disabled person. Because if you want to visit someone in that tower, or if you want to have a meeting in that tower, you can't. And this is where different doesn't equal disabled comes back in. The reason why neurodiverse people struggle so much is they live in a society that wasn't designed for them. Someone with autism once quipped that to someone with autism, society seems one that's disorganized, chaotic, and obsessed with socializing and physical contact. And I'm sure other neuroconditions, neurodiverse people would have similar points. And this really is why allyship is so important. There's a artwork from the LGBT community that I really like, which is on the slide right now, and explains why ally is a verb and not a noun. Being an ally doesn't mean saying that you're an ally. Being an ally doesn't mean bragging about it or putting it into a row. It means doing things. So let's talk about what you can do. So the first thing you can do is understand disclosure. Some people might go their entire life being neurodiverse, and they know it, and they just don't want to tell you because it's a private health matter. I don't expect you to tell me all your health matters, and why should you expect me to tell yours? And they can adapt well in the workplace because the way their neurodiversity manifests maps well onto society. And that's perfectly okay. For other people, however, it's a serious dilemma because they have to choose between disclosing and risking stigma, because there's a lot of negative stereotypes around neurodiverse people, from people with autism being unfriendly and disliking people to people with ADHD being annoying and never getting work done. And then they're worried that if they disclose, they'll get a lot of stigma from it. No matter what neurodiverse condition you have, it's when you disclose it, it's basically admitting that you have a weakness. On the other hand, if they don't disclose, then they struggle in silence. There are key changes that can be made to their job and their environment to get more performance and to get more quality of life out that they don't, but they can't because they're so afraid. And if someone discloses to you, make sure to validate it, make sure they feel accepted, and then ask them how you can make things better, or if you need to make things better. The other thing is make it clear that your company is a space where neurodiversity is accepted. The one final point I make on disclosure, and I kind of hate that I have to point this out, but don't speculate about what conditions people have, because it can put someone in a position where if you ask them, hey, I think you have this condition, then either they have to say, if they have the condition, they have to effectively lie to you or disclose when they want to, but if they don't, it can be really insulting. And at the end of the day, your speculation probably won't be very accurate because you're not a psychologist. Diagnosis is a serious thing and requires real knowledge. Let's talk about the environment. When we design environments for neurodiverse people, or adjust environments for neurodiverse people, there are two things we're trying to achieve. The first is we're trying to reduce sensory overwhelm, because people with neurodiversity can get overwhelmed by their senses because it's processed differently. The other thing we're trying to do is reduce unnecessary socializing. So we're all social creatures, we enjoy having a bit of a chat, a banter, and neurodiverse people as well. But every neurodiverse person has like a threshold for that. Like, I don't like to banter as much as my team typically does. And just giving the opportunity for them to sort of take a step back from that. So let's talk about things in details. First of all, have areas with lower light. This is a big one for people with neurodiversity. They find light often very overwhelming. And if you could have an area in your office which is just a little bit darker, maybe the lights are dimmed or some lights are turned off, it can make a big difference. Also avoid fluorescent lighting for the area, because some people really, even some neurodiverse people really don't like fluorescent lighting. Have areas in co-working spaces which are slightly separated and or blocked off. So if you have a big open plan area, you can make a big difference. I'll give you an example of this. When I did my internship, we had 2 rows of tables and one at the end, and this was repeated across the floor. I always went to the table at the end because I felt that, first of all, if I was on that table in the corridor, I felt like I was always staring at someone and someone was always watching me work. The second reason is, and I swear this isn't why I chose the table at the end, it had 2 giant monitors. Now, I didn't need that many monitors. I'm a software developer, not whatever needs 2 giant monitors. But what it basically did is meant that there was a slight block. So I didn't have to sort of be in on the banter. If someone wanted to talk to me, they just have to move their chair slightly to the right. And this really helped me focus. Have quieter spaces, so areas where there's just less talking or less other noise. Allow the use of headphones or earmuffs. So for example, one of the things that pretty much necessary for me to cope is when I'm not talking to someone, I usually have my headphones on, not just when I'm coding, but also when I'm walking around the office. If I see someone I want to talk to, I just pop them off, have a chat, and then put them back on. I even bring them to meetings with me. So obviously I don't wear them in the meetings. That would be kind of counterintuitive, though I'm sure there's some meetings where we all wish we could wear a pair of headphones and just nod along. But basically, once the meeting was over and everyone's dispersed, I just pop them back on and continue with my flow. Be flexible around preferred work areas. For all the environmental reasons I've discussed so far, sometimes people who are neurodiverse really just like one area of a building. So, example from my brother's company, someone with autism got promoted. Congratulations. He's like, oh, awesome, thanks. Here's your bigger office. So he's like, no, thank you. I like the small one. Another example is I know someone with ADHD, and her team moved to a different building, and she didn't like it as much. So they worked out a situation where she could work part-time in the old building and part-time in the new building. Be flexible around work from home. The one good thing to get from COVID is this fight is now a lot easier to make. Even on teams with high collaborations, 1 day a week can make a big difference. So I used to work at home 1 day a week, which is good because I like that day where I can work in my optimum environment at home and have a bit of a break, but also see my team enough to really build those professional relationships. And provide opportunities to discuss environmental issues. One little thing you can do is you can just once or twice a quarter post on your teams or other chat app, hey, is there anything about the environment you don't like? If your team is anything like mine, you probably get some memes like, I know what I don't like about the team, Greg can get rid of him. But someone might have some real feedback that will improve their life, and not necessarily even a neurodiverse person. Maybe there's a plant that's really smelly. Maybe their office, their desk hasn't been a standing desk for a while because the motor broke. And finally, overall, try to reduce sensory and socializing reduction options for people with neurodiversity. Let's talk a little bit about job design. First of all, give the option to provide written or verbal instructions. I don't know how, something I do personally, I don't know how many other people can do this, is whenever I give instructions to a team, I type them up while I'm talking, so you get the benefit of both. Give more detailed instructions if desired. Something that my manager picked up on very quickly is that I need about 30 to 50% more detailed instructions. This isn't this line of code, this line of code, and this line of code. It's just, here's where you get this from, or here's who you talk to. Adjust job design where possible to remove tasks they struggle with. If you know someone with neurodiversity really struggles with a task, especially if it's a task that other people just find perfectly normal, it does help a lot to reassign those tasks. And what you can do is sometimes people with neurodiversity are really good at tasks that other people struggle with, so you can balance that out. A really trivial example of this is, in my home I have one of those liquid soap dispensers, and I really hate the feeling of congealed soap, so I get my dad to refill it. And in return, I vacuum the whole house. I think that's a pretty good deal. Adjust recruitment or have separate recruitment for neurodiverse people. So often we all kind of know that interviews aren't the best way to assess someone. Just because you interview well doesn't mean that you're good at your job. That's why a lot of companies have moved to stuff like, sit down, and write this algorithm for me, or whiteboard out a solution, or what have you. You can make more adjustments in traditional recruitment methods for people who are neurodiversity. For example, if someone with autism, maybe give them 10 minutes alone with a whiteboard, or ideally have separate recruitment processes tailored for neurodiverse people. A lot of companies especially have programs for people with autism who typically don't interview well. Include neurodiversity in diversity in human resources, policies, and discussions. If it's hopefully already included, but if it's not already, shoot an email to whoever's in charge of that. If it's HR, you might earn yourself some brownie points. Normally, the reason for it isn't anything malicious. Normally, it's just oversight. But all of this is a lot of stuff. There's actually a simple activity I really like. Let's say you meet with your team on a regular basis, daily or weekly, and it's always in the same room or a similar room, and it's in one of these very fancy offices that we all tend to work in these days. Often these offices have the ability to dim the lights. And what you can do is you just take 2 minutes, one meeting, to say, hey, I noticed that lights are dimmable. Here's what looks at this level, and this level. Does anyone have a preference? And a lot of people say, no, I don't really have a preference, but it might mean a lot to someone. And then if it means a lot to someone, just reduce the lighting at the start of every meeting, and you just did your first step to being an ally of neurodiverse people. And all this is important because things are changing. Up until now, there's a real culture around fear with neurodiverse people. Oh, what happens if my employer finds out that I have insert condition? Will they think less of me? What will people think? I hope my condition doesn't, cause me to lose my job or cause me to not get a promotion. But this is changing. This is changing to a culture of pride, because people with neurodiverse conditions are slowly understanding that it's just something about themselves. It comes with strengths and weaknesses. It's something to be proud of, like it's proud to be a woman, it's proud to be of a certain ethnicity, or it's proud to be LGBT. And they're looking for companies that are accepting of that and value that. And when it comes to acceptance, it tends to go up over time. You have your outliers, like Bank West, who all the way back in 2016 gave a fantastic presentation at Test West about how they created an internship opportunity for someone with autism in the software testing field. Bank West always kind of being ahead of the curve on these sort of things. Then fast forward to current year, 2021. You have companies like EY, Microsoft, CAI, Woodside, and Deloitte. Most of them offer autism-specific opportunities, and they're all neurodiverse friendly. And there's a good reason for that. As I said, neurodiverse people are cognitive specialists. They have minds of every kind, and that can unlock a lot of innovation possibilities. And a lot of the innovators of the past have been neurodiverse. So let's run through some examples. You have Dr. Vernon Smith, diagnosed with autism. Nobel Prize winner in economics. He did groundbreaking research in experimental economics. Don't ask me what that means, I don't know. But it's good enough to give him a Nobel Prize. You have Bram Cohen, diagnosed with autism. Inventor of BitTorrent, an innovative peer-to-peer networking protocol. And trust me, it can be used for things other than piracy. One of the interesting ways it's used is when large multiplayer games need to distribute to thousands or millions of users quickly on launch, often they use peer-to-peer networking to make that possible. And there's a lot of other niche situations where peer-to-peer networking is extremely useful. You have Richard Branson, diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. Successful founder of the Virgin Group. They do airlines, they have a space company, they have bikes, mobiles, radio, and they once did a soda. It's actually a really interesting story, well worth the Google. And most impressively, and I'm pretty sure this is uncontested, he was the first billionaire in space. Stephen Fry, diagnosed with autism. Beloved British actor. He did QI, V for Vendetta, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He's a real powerhouse of an actor, beloved by pretty much anyone who knows of him. And he was the voice actor of the video game Little Big Planet, which I only mention because it's just a delight to listen to. Going back quite a number of years now, we have Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday is an interesting one because dyslexia is diagnosed based on your writing style. There's a specific dyslexic writing style, and historians went through and looked at his personal journals and manuscripts and historically diagnosed him with dyslexia. It's one of the rare cases where we can do that. Now, his main discoveries include the principles underlying electromagnetic induction, diamagnetism, and electroanalysis. Now, I especially don't know what that means, but what I do know is it was really big in the electrical engineering field. Like, anyone who knows a lot about electrical engineering history would know who Michael Faraday is. That's why they call it the Faraday cage, in case anyone's heard of that. In the realm of entertainment, we have Billie Eilish, diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. Famous musician and creator of songs like Bad Guy and Bury a Friend. She won many Grammys and Billboard Awards, and if you haven't heard of her, it's because she's popular with the youth. Now, many in the room here today do still consider themselves youths, but that in case you didn't hear of her. And then it's the iceberg again. And this iceberg is especially deep because knowledge and understanding and the ability to diagnose neurodiverse conditions have only really come out in the last couple of decades. So a lot of the great minds historically have been speculated by psychologists and historians to be neurodiverse, and this is informed speculation. You have everyone from Sir Isaac Newton to Nikola Tesla to Steve Jobs, and I don't include them as examples because I'm iffy on speculation, but something to keep in mind. And it's certainly what these companies keep in mind, because time and time again, study after study has proven, and time itself, that companies that are diverse get ahead because they have a diverse set of minds and diverse set of backgrounds to work on things. So when these new graduates come forward and they're prideful about their conditions, because at university, people talk about their conditions openly. It was a shock to me when I entered the workplace and people were like, oh yeah, I don't tell anyone. People are increasingly prideful in their conditions and they're looking for accepting workplaces. they'll accept them for who they are and the strengths and weaknesses that come from that. And when these extremely talented people are looking for work, where do you want your company to be on this distribution? So far, I've only talked about how neurodiverse people can benefit you. And that's important. We all do this for a living. This is how we make money, or most of us anyway. But the fact of the matter is, you can change someone's life with just a bit of action, with just a bit of change in the workplace. You can change someone from feeling overwhelmed and horrible at the end of the day because things are too bright, too noisy, and they have to do jobs they really struggle with, to someone going home at the end of the day and feeling amazing, like we want everyone to feel. Or even more important than that, you can make someone go home at the end of the day. Sorry, you can give someone the opportunity to work to begin with. Because some people cannot work unless they're given a more neurodiversity friendly environment. Typically, in a presentation like this, you would see the statistics on neurodiverse people in employment, and I'm not including them. The reason for this is when I was first getting diagnosed, I went to a presentation like that, and that was so upsetting I almost left the room. They are pretty bleak. People who have neurodiverse conditions struggle with both acquiring and keeping work, and especially finding meaningful work. And now, I suppose, is a good time to transition to talk about my own journey. All throughout my life, and especially after school, I had this problem where you expect in life things will get better over time. You'll get a job, you'll get promoted, you'll get a girlfriend, you'll buy a house, all those big life milestones. But for me, I found that I wasn't making any progress. I felt constantly stressed, overwhelmed, upset, and I didn't know why. Eventually, mental health issues filled that gap for me. I felt really terrible about myself, and that eventually led to me getting in front of a psychologist. But thankfully, she picked up on very quickly that I had autism, and gave me the tools to both understand myself and use that understanding to start building things to get better. So far in this talk, I haven't really discussed much about neurology, and there's a good reason for that. I'm not a neurologist. However, there is a really good way of explaining autism that I found, and I've given this explanation of neurology in front of neurologists, and they didn't yell at me. In fact, one was like, yeah, that's about right. So, let's do it. Broadly speaking, the brain can be separated into 3 layers. You have the reptile layer that's very fast but very dumb. That's good for stuff like the flight or flight mechanism, or you hear rustle in the bushes and you're like, "Good, what was that? Is that a tiger? In my backyard?" You have the intuition layer, which is kind of slow, kind of smart, and it's sort of like when you have a general feeling about something, like I feel this conversation's going well, or I feel scared or about this situation. Not necessarily feelings, but just sort of intuitions. And then above that, you have the cognitive layer, which by comparison to other ones is extremely slow, but very smart. This is when you actually stop and think through something. Think through the code you're working on, or you think through a situation that you're in. People with autism lack that intuition layer, and the cognitive layer has to take over basically all these responsibilities. And to illustrate this difference, I'll give an example. When someone comes and gives you a hug, what happens in your brain is on the reptile layer, they go, "Oh, that's enormous! Look at his giant arms, he's going to attack me!" and starts to send out warning signs. Now, the intuition layer, before the reptile's signals can even leave the brain, goes, "Bad, that's a hug, I like hugs." And then 1,000,000 years later, the cognition brain catches up and goes, "Oh, that's nice, I like hugs. Oh, it's strange, this person doesn't usually hug me." In someone with autism's brain, the reptile brain goes, "Ugh," and then they either freeze up or sometimes back away. And then ages later, the cognitive brain catches up. And usually what happens is they think like, "Ugh, I hate hugs. Why is this person hugging me?" Or, "Oh, I missed up a hug again." And this change manifests in a couple of interesting ways. People with autism tend to be smarter. That's because their cognitive brain is constantly being worked out. But people with autism also tend to get overwhelmed more easily because every single every single change that presented to them, they have to process on the cognitive layer. They have to stop and think through it. This is why people with autism like systems, because once you systematize something, you don't have to think about it. You just follow the system. This is also why people with autism, so I find that when there's a small change, I actually have to stop and think about it sometimes. Like, for example, imagine you think you know where someone is, you go over there looking for them, and they're not there. I once turned a corner and just stared at the person's desk for a good minute until the slightly unfriendly person next to him said, "What?" I was like, so that was a bit of an awkward situation. So let's talk about what happened after my diagnosis. So I struggled with socializing and productivity. I passed most of my bachelor's degree with just 4 productive hours a week, and I got pretty good grades. On average, I'd sometimes go weeks at a time without having any productive hours and then do like 12 hours and complete a project in a day. Over time, I got so much support from the university system and from my psychologist and from my doctor and most importantly from a mentor. And this led to progress over time, where I went from 4 hours to 8 hours to 16 hours to 20 hours and eventually to 30 hours. And this is where I felt I was ready to test my progress. So I applied for Woodside on a friend's recommendation, and I got offered a job. And I disclosed that autism immediately. And they were so supportive. I found a supportive team. HR came in before I even arrived at the business and gave the team a whole bunch of information. And when things were struggling, the team was there for support. And because of all this, I'm now someone who can work. Because I do consider myself as someone with a disability, in the way due to the way my autism presents itself. I went from someone who 5 years ago, in 2016 when I was diagnosed, could not have a job. And thanks to the allyship and support of people from university to the workplace, I am now someone who can hold down a full-time job, and I know I have a lot of value to give. And that's why I'm giving this presentation, because I believe it's an important message. And it's why I'm so thankful to our sponsors. If it wasn't for the generous sponsorship of the people on the screen, this event would not be able to happen. And we won't be able to share important messages that we'll be able to share today. Both important technical things, which makes us all better at our jobs, and important other messages that make our companies better, make people's lives better, and makes our products better. And I would also like to thank the incredible volunteers who've generously volunteered so much of their time and squeezed every last drop of value out of those generous sponsors' money. What I'd like to end on is, you can't decide who innovation comes from. You can't just say, you come up with a market-changing innovation, or we have this multi-million-dollar problem that's extremely complex, just solve that real quick, please. Innovation requires the right mind for the right task, or right minds for the task. If you don't have a diverse set of minds in your organization, you're going to miss out on innovation, because the organizations that do will leave you in the dust. Thank you so much for your time today.